During World War II, few soldiers were hated more than snipers. A single hidden shooter could slow down an entire unit, picking off men one by one from a rooftop, a forest, or even a church tower. For Allied soldiers on the ground, running into a sniper wasn't just dangerous, it was terrifying. These weren't seen as regular enemies fighting face-to-face. Snipers were viewed as sneaky hunters who killed without warning, then vanished before anyone could fight back. Because of this, German snipers often faced brutal treatment when they were captured. Officially, they were supposed to be treated like any other prisoner of war under the Geneva Convention. But in reality, emotions on the battlefield often took over. In this story, we'll look at how the Allies dealt with German snipers, the mix of rules and revenge, and what it says about the darker side of war. Snipers played a unique role in World War II. Unlike regular infantry, their job was not to fight in large battles, but to pick targets carefully and spread fear. A skilled sniper could slow down a whole company of soldiers, forcing men to crawl through mud, hide behind rubble, or wait hours before moving. Even if a sniper only killed a few people, the psychological impact was huge. The German army trained many of its snipers to be highly effective. They used camouflage suits, special scopes, and patience to blend into their surroundings. To the Allies, this made them especially dangerous. A single German sniper left unchecked could hold up tanks, engineers, and infantry, making progress costly. But beyond the practical danger, there was also deep resentment. Allied soldiers often felt snipers were fighting unfairly. In their minds, it was one thing to fight in open combat, but it was something else to hide in the shadows and shoot men who never saw it coming. This hatred was fueled by propaganda as well, with German sharpshooters sometimes portrayed as cold-blooded killers rather than normal soldiers. This reputation meant that German snipers, once identified, often faced harsher treatment than ordinary troops. On paper, they were supposed to be protected by the same rules as any other prisoner of war. In practice, however, their reputation as cowards or assassins shaped how many Allied soldiers viewed them. Officially, the Allies were bound by the Geneva Convention, which meant captured German snipers were supposed to be treated the same as any other prisoner of war. They could be disarmed, searched, and sent to the rear, but not harmed. On paper, there was no distinction between a sniper and a regular infantryman. However, the reality in the field was different. Many Allied units quietly developed their own unwritten rules when it came to snipers. Some commanders gave orders that snipers should be shown no mercy, especially if they had targeted medics, officers, or stretcher bearers. In the heat of battle, these rules often turned into acts of revenge. The treatment also varied by nation. American and British forces sometimes tried to stick to official policy, but frontline soldiers often ignored it in practice. Canadian troops in Normandy, for example, gained a reputation for showing little pity to captured snipers. On the Eastern Front, the Soviets were far harsher, as they viewed German snipers as criminals rather than soldiers, and execution on the spot was not uncommon. At the same time, Allied intelligence officers valued snipers for the information they might provide. Some were interrogated to learn about German positions, sniper schools, or unit strength. In those cases, captured snipers were kept alive at least long enough to be questioned. In short, while the rules of war said one thing, the frontline reality was often much harsher, especially for men identified as snipers. History provides several clear examples of how German snipers were treated once captured by the Allies, and the stories range from executions to rare moments of mercy. In Normandy, 1944, Canadian soldiers developed a particularly tough reputation when it came to dealing with snipers. Several accounts from veterans mention that if a sniper was caught, he was often shot on the spot rather than taken prisoner. This was partly because Canadian units had suffered heavily from sniper fire in the dense hedgerows. One report tells of a sniper who killed a popular officer. When captured, he was executed almost immediately by angry soldiers. American troops were not much different in certain cases. In France and Belgium, veterans recalled that suspected snipers were sometimes beaten or killed without trial. Soldiers described feeling that a sniper wasn't a normal fighter, but more like a murderer hiding in the shadows. At the same time, there are examples of American officers stepping in to prevent revenge killings, reminding their men that the rules of war still applied. British forces also dealt harshly with snipers at times. One story from Italy describes a German sniper being caught after days of terrorizing a village. The locals, furious at the deaths he caused, reportedly encouraged British troops to kill him outright. In other cases, however, captured snipers were processed and sent to POW camps like any other prisoner. The harshest examples came from the Eastern Front. Soviet troops were notorious for executing snipers on the spot, often after brief interrogation. To them, German sharpshooters were not soldiers, but criminals who preyed on Red Army troops. Survivors from sniper units described it as almost impossible to expect fair treatment if captured by the Soviets. Not all snipers were executed, though. There are records of German sharpshooters surviving as prisoners of war, especially if they were captured away from the heat of combat. These men were usually interrogated for tactical information before being shipped to the rear. Still, the fact that so many accounts of quick executions exist shows how dangerous it was to be identified as a sniper. The way German snipers were treated often depended on the circumstances of their capture. In many cases, raw emotion drove the decision. If a sniper had just killed a respected officer, a medic, or several soldiers in a unit, the surviving men were far less likely to spare him. Revenge came quickly, and in the heat of battle, rules were rarely considered. Another factor was the setting. If the sniper was caught during a firefight, the chance of him being executed on the spot was much higher. But if he was captured later, when tempers had cooled, he stood a better chance of being treated as a regular prisoner of war. Distance from the front lines often meant distance from raw emotion. Identification also played a role. It wasn't always easy to prove someone was a sniper. Unless a man was caught with a scoped rifle, special camouflage, or had been spotted in action, soldiers might simply assume he was regular infantry. In those cases, he might slip through without harsher punishment. Propaganda and reputation added fuel to the fire. Allied troops were told that German snipers were especially cruel, sometimes targeting medics or civilians. This made men feel justified in showing no mercy. On the Eastern Front, Soviet hatred of the German army meant that snipers were automatically seen as war criminals. In short, the treatment of snipers was shaped by anger, timing, proof, and propaganda, creating a situation where survival was often a matter of chance. From a legal standpoint, German snipers were no different from any other soldier. Under the Geneva Convention, once captured, they were entitled to the same rights as prisoners of war: food, shelter, and protection from violence. Nothing in international law labeled sniping as illegal. In fact, snipers were officially recognized as legitimate combatants. But in practice, things looked very different. When Allied troops executed captured snipers, it was technically a war crime. However, most of these incidents were never reported, and even when they were, they rarely led to punishment. Commanders often turned a blind eye, understanding the emotions that drove their men. On the Soviet side, executions were almost expected, and no attempt was made to hide them. Historians today argue that the treatment of snipers shows the thin line between the rules of war and the reality of combat. While the laws said one thing, hatred and fear pushed soldiers in another direction. It wasn't an organized policy across the Western Allies, but rather a series of local emotional decisions. On the Eastern Front, however, the executions were far closer to policy. This mix of legality, morality, and revenge shows just how messy war can become once emotions take control. German snipers were among the most feared soldiers of World War II. Their ability to strike from the shadows gave them a reputation that went far beyond their actual numbers. For the Allies, this reputation often meant that captured snipers faced harsher treatment than ordinary troops. Official rules demanded fairness, but anger, fear, and revenge often won out in the field. Looking back, these stories remind us that war is not only fought with weapons, but also with emotions. The treatment of German snipers shows how easily rules can bend when hatred and survival are on the line. If you found this story about German snipers in World War II interesting, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more hidden stories from history. Hit the bell so you never miss the next episode, and let me know in the comments what topic you'd like to see covered next. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next one.